They were taught to shape the paintbrush with their lips, dip, paint, and draw the bristles between their mouths, hundreds of times a day. The paint was made with radium, and no one told them to stop. In the years after the First World War, hundreds of young women were hired to paint watch dials with that glowing paint. Within a few years, some of those women were dying in ways their doctors could not explain, and the companies that employed them already knew why. This is the story of the Radium Girls, and it is the story of how a handful of dying factory workers forced a nation to change the rules of work itself. To understand it, you have to understand what radium meant in the 1910s and 1920s. Radium had been discovered by Marie and Pierre Curie at the very end of the 19th century, and in the decades that followed it became a wonder of the age. It glowed in the dark with a faint, otherworldly light, and because it was mysterious and expensive, it was marketed as something close to magic. Radium was put into tonics, cosmetics, toothpaste, even chocolate. People believed it brought health and vitality. And its glow made it perfect for one particular job, painting the numbers on watch and instrument dials so they could be read in the dark. Factories opened to do exactly that. Among the best known were plants in Orange, New Jersey, and later in Ottawa, Illinois. The work was considered good work. It was clean, it paid well, and it was respectable employment for young working-class women, some of them still teenagers. The dial painters sat at long tables, dipping fine camel hair brushes into luminous paint and tracing tiny numbers with a steadiness that required a very fine point. To keep that point sharp, the women were taught a technique called lip pointing. They would draw the bristles between their lips to shape them, dip, paint, and then bring the brush back to their mouths again. Dip, paint, lip. Hundreds of times a day. With every pass, they swallowed a little radium. No one told them not to. In fact, the women were reassured. The paint was harmless, they were told. Some of them, young and playful, painted their fingernails with it, or their teeth, so they would glow when they went out dancing. They wore their good dresses to work and carried the shimmer home in their hair. They were, for a while, the glowing girls, and they thought it was wonderful. Then the illnesses began. It started, for many, in the mouth. Teeth ached and loosened. Sores appeared in the gums that would not heal. When dentists pulled the failing teeth, the sockets refused to close, and the jawbone beneath began to crumble. Doctors gave the condition a grim name that would become infamous: radium jaw. In the worst cases, a woman's jaw could be lifted away in pieces. But it did not stop at the mouth. The radium the women had swallowed behaved, in the body, like calcium, and so it was deposited into their bones, where it stayed, quietly irradiating them from the inside for the rest of their lives. Bones grew brittle and broke under ordinary strain. Spines collapsed. Anemia set in. Women who had been healthy and young were becoming invalids, and some were dying, and their doctors were baffled. Here is the turn in the story, the part that moves it from tragedy to scandal. The companies were not baffled. There is strong evidence that the dangers of radium were understood by scientists and by company management well before the dial painters fell ill. Notably, the men who handled radium in laboratory and research settings used lead screens, tongs, and protective masks. The protection existed. It simply was not extended to the women at the painting tables, who were still being taught to put the brushes in their mouths. And when the women began to sicken, some accounts describe company-backed examinations whose alarming findings were not honestly shared with the workers themselves. The women were, in some cases, told they were fine, or told their troubles were due to other causes, even as the evidence mounted. What the companies may not have counted on was that some of these dying women would fight. In New Jersey, a group of afflicted dial painters, led by a woman named Grace Fryer, sought to bring their case to court. It was extraordinarily difficult. Many lawyers would not take it. The women were poor, they were increasingly ill, and the statute of limitations threatened to run out before their slow-developing injuries could even be proven. Some were so weakened by the time of the proceedings that they could not raise their arms to be sworn in. But they persisted, and their case, and similar cases, including those of workers in Illinois, drew national attention. The image of young women poisoned by their own employer, then told nothing, was too stark to ignore. The dial painters ultimately reached settlements, and their fight reverberated far beyond their own suffering. Their cases helped establish, in a way that had never been so clearly established before, that an employer could be held responsible for the long-term diseases its working conditions caused, even diseases that appeared years after the exposure. The science their bodies provided, tragically, also advanced the understanding of how radiation harms the human body, informing safety standards that would matter enormously in the atomic age to come. And the legal principle they helped forge fed into the broader development of occupational safety law, the framework that today is supposed to protect anyone who works with a dangerous substance. The radium in their bones did not go away. Radium's influence fades only across centuries, far longer than a human life. Decades later, when researchers studied the surviving radium girls, their bodies still registered on radiation detectors. Some of the women lived long lives despite everything, others were gone within a few years of the glow. When a few of their graves were later examined by scientists studying radiation, the remains, it is said, still faintly registered, the shimmer they had once worn to dances, still with them in the dark. Which leaves a question that has never stopped being relevant: how many of the products sold to us today as harmless, as healthful, as modern, are the radium of our own age, and how long will it take before anyone admits what was known all along?